The tradition continues.
Calvary Global to the world 24/7.
Tradition continues.
Calvary.
Canadian prosecutors have charged a Vancouver man with 8 counts of second-degree murder for the car-ramming attack at a Filipino festival. Further charges are expected to follow. At least 11 people were killed when a driver ploughed into a crowd at the Lapu-Lapu street celebration. An investigation continues, but police say the 30-year-old suspect had a history of mental issues and is believed to have acted alone. Israel's armies carried out a series of airstrikes on the southern suburbs of Lebanon's capital, Beirut. The attacks came less than an hour after residents in the Dahia neighborhood were told to evacuate and move away from several buildings. Israel's military claims that the buildings were being used to store precision missiles belonging to Hezbollah. Yemeni media say at least 8 people have been killed in US airstrikes on the capital, Sana'a. Strikes hit several homes in the northern part of the city. Children and women are said to be among the victims. The US military claims that it has struck more than 800 targets in Yemen since mid-March and killed hundreds of Houthi members. Israel's continued to target Palestinians across Gaza with airstrikes, artillery fire and attacks from the sea. At least 50 people have been killed on Sunday, half of them reportedly children. Near the Nusrat refugee camp, at least 6 Palestinians were killed when Israeli warplanes struck a cafeteria, while at least 8 were killed in Khan Yunis after missiles struck makeshift tents sheltering displaced civilians. And Ukraine's president says his forces are still fighting in Russia's Kursk region, despite Moscow's claims that it has recaptured the area. Volodymyr Zelensky says that fierce clashes are ongoing in Kursk and Belgorod. Ukraine has occupied part of the area since August, hoping to use it as a bargaining chip in future peace talks. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump says that he wants his counterpart, Vladimir Putin, to stop Russia's attacks and to sign a peace deal with Ukraine.
I was very disappointed that missiles were flying by Russia. I want them to stop shooting, sit down and sign a deal. And we have the confines of a deal, I believe. And I want him to sign it and be done with it and just go back to life.
In Gaza, Israeli forces continue to target the entire strip, killing at least 50 more Palestinians. Overnight strikes targeted the tents of displaced civilians in Al-Mawasi, designated by Israel to be a safe zone. But there's nowhere safe to go in Gaza, much of which has become uninhabitable. The death toll overall since October 2023 has surpassed 52,200. Meanwhile, Israel's policy of blocking aid from entering Gaza is pushing even more children to the brink of death. It's been 2 months since the last delivery of aid reached the strip, where more than 2 million people live.
Osama suffers from malnutrition. He now weighs 9 kilos, whereas a normal 5-year-old child should weigh between 15 and 16 kilos. Osama is severely underweight and suffers from acute malnutrition due to the closure of the crossings and the lack of foodstuff. He needs special food to go back to normal.
Palestinian official Ammar Hijazi has told the International Court of Justice that Israel is using the blocking of aid to Gaza as a weapon of war. The UN's top court opened hearings on Monday to examine Israel's obligations to allow humanitarian aid into the occupied territories. Israel is not taking part in those hearings. Russian President Vladimir Putin has declared a 3-day ceasefire in the war in Ukraine to take place in May. But the announcement from the Kremlin was dismissed by Kiev, and the White House says the temporary measure is not enough and that a permanent ceasefire is needed to bring the conflict to a peaceful resolution. Polls have closed in Canada's federal election, which will determine who becomes the country's next Prime Minister. And with early results already in, domestic broadcasters are suggesting a win for the Liberals. US President Donald Trump's tariffs and threats about annexing Canada became central issues. Trump's threats led to a surge of support for the Liberal Prime Minister Mark Carney. Canadians have to choose either Carney or opposition leader Pierre Poilievre. And Spain's Prime Minister says nearly half of the national power supply is now being restored following a major blackout that struck several cities across Spain and Portugal. It disrupted public transport, causing traffic jams and delaying airline flights. Investigations into the cause continue. Israel's assault across Gaza continues, killing at least 37 Palestinians on Tuesday. Many of them were sheltering in makeshift tents. The Al-Mawasi area of Khan Yunis was designated a safe zone for civilians by Tel Aviv, but like so many others, it's also come under attack. Meanwhile, the UN has warned of a looming famine in Gaza as Israel continues to blockade deliveries. The UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees has called the blockade a silent killer. The second day of public hearings at the International Court of Justice taken place in The Hague. The hearings are meant to establish an ICJ advisory opinion on obligations of Israel towards its occupied territories and its breaches of international law in stopping supplies from entering Gaza. Aid has been blocked from entering the Strip for 51 days, while Israel's military has intensified its campaign. In an event meant to commemorate his first 100 days in office, Donald Trump touted what he described as a series of major wins economically and politically. He also attacked Democrats and criticized the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, for refusing to lower interest rates. Since re-entering office, Trump has reshaped the U.S. government with a tide of executive actions.
We're here tonight in the heartland of our nation to celebrate the most successful first 100 days of any administration in the history of our country, and that's according to many, many people. This is the best, they say, 100-day start of any president in history.
Donald Trump is trying to break us. That will never happen. That was the victory speech of Mark Carney after his Liberal Party secured a historic win in Canada's election. The Liberals have been 20 percentage points behind in January's polls. That was before the US president started threatening Canada with tariffs and annexation, which became defining issues of the campaign. And Pakistan's Information Minister Atullah Tara has warned of a possible Indian military strike within 24 to 36 hours. It comes as tensions rise between the nations after an attack that killed 26 tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir last week.
The US and Ukraine have announced their long-anticipated minerals deal after months of negotiations. President Donald Trump had pressed Kyiv to compensate Washington for the billions of dollars in assistance it had given to help Ukraine defend itself against Russia. For Ukraine, the agreement is seen as key to ensure future access to US military assistance. Meanwhile, Trump has blamed his predecessor Joe Biden for the shrinking US economy. Amid the threat of tariffs, businesses have raced to stockpile goods and avoid higher costs, resulting in a 0.3% drop in GDP in the first quarter. Americans' disapproval of Trump's handling of the economy seems to be growing, but he's asked for more time to get the economy moving.
Core GDP, now we're removing distortions from imports, inventories, and government spending, was up plus 3%. But this is Biden's economy because we took over on January 20th. And I think you have to get us a little bit of time to get moving, but this is the Biden economy.
It's been almost 2 months since Israel's total blockade of food and medical aid to Gaza, isolating the enclave. The UN is warning of a deepening humanitarian crisis. Israel has also continued to bombard areas across Gaza. At least 20 Palestinians were killed on Wednesday, with the death toll now exceeding 52,000. The US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has called on India and Pakistan to de-escalate tensions after last week's attack in India-administered Kashmir. Rubio also encouraged India to work with Pakistan to probe the attack. Pakistan said on Monday that it had credible intelligence that an attack by India was imminent. India has blamed Pakistan for the killing of 26 tourists last week, a charge Islamabad denies. The UN says over 1,600 people have been killed in gang violence in Haiti in the first 3 months of the year. Over half of them were gang members. On Wednesday, dozens of people swam across Haiti's longest river in an attempt to flee the violence after a fresh attack. A Kenyan-led force authorized by the UN has so far failed to push back the gangs.
Congo and Rwanda were expected to submit a draft agreement to end the war in Congo's east Friday. The agreement would be in line with the Declaration of Principles signed in Washington a week ago. Delegations from Kinshasa and Kigali have been meeting in Qatar to iron out their differences. On Wednesday, the U.S. President's Africa envoy, Massad Boulos, joined Congolese, Rwandan, Togolese and French representatives at the talks in Doha. The draft deal would cover issues such as territorial sovereignty, the fight against armed groups, the mineral trade, refugees, and the role of international forces, particularly MONUSCO. Rwanda-backed rebels took control of 2 provincial capitals in eastern Congo earlier this year, forcing Kinshasa to soften its stance on dialogue with the M23 group.
In this suburb of Damascus, known as Jaramana, locals have been urged to hand over their weapons to the authorities. It is a suburb where days of clashes between pro-Syrian government gunmen and fighters who belong to the Druze minority sect left dozens dead or injured. Authorities say they will erect checkpoints and further improve security in the suburb. Reach an agreement with the people of Jaramana for them to hand over their weapons to the government, and everyone will have to follow government rules. Security forces will enter the area to ensure security and to set up security checkpoints around Jaramana to prevent the entry of disruptive groups here. Early Friday, the Druze religious leaders say the community is part of Syria and refuses to break away from the country, adding that the role of the state should be activated in the southern province of Soida.
The humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues to worsen, with the UN warning the territory is eating toward running on empty. It described a landscape devastated by war, where hospitals are out of blood supplies, fuel is strictly rationed, and basic survival needs like water are triggering conflict among civilians.
Hospitals report running out of blood units as mass casualties continue to arrive. Gaza is inching closer to running on empty, as fuel also is being rationed to maintain only the most critical operations running.
Amid this desperation, a ship carrying a humanitarian aid to Gaza was struck by drones in international waters off Malta, according to the Freedom Flotilla Coalition. The explosion, caught on video, ignited a fire aboard the vessel Conscience, which was later extinguished.
Sounding the alarm on the state of press freedom. It's been nearly 3 months since Reporters Without Borders laid 20 coffins at the Place de la République in Paris to draw attention to the plight of Ukrainian journalists imprisoned or even killed by Russia in the war in Ukraine. The stark message resonates even louder ahead of World Press Freedom Day. Reporters Without Borders publishing their annual index on the best place to be a journalist. RSF has ranked Europe as having the most press freedom in the world. Southern and eastern areas, though, are still lagging behind the rest of the continent. In Gaza, the coffins are very real. Ranked at 163, Palestine has become one of the most dangerous places for journalists in the world amid Israel's war. Euromed Monitor estimates at least 211 journalists have been killed in the enclave since the beginning of the conflict. Meanwhile, the US is now down to a record low ranking of 57. RSF pointing the finger at President Donald Trump for overseeing what it says is a troubling deterioration.
The Algerian international footballer Youssef Attal has once again been convicted on appeal for inciting religious hatred after reposting a video of a Palestinian preacher speaking about Gaza. On Wednesday, April 30th, the Court of Appeal in France upheld the original verdict, sentencing Attal to an 8-month suspended prison term and a $51,000 fine. The ruling confirmed the sentence handed down in January 2024 by the criminal court in Nice. In addition to the fine, Attal has been ordered to pay around 15,000 euros in legal costs to the civil parties in the case, which include the French Professional Football League, the International League Against Racism and Anti-Semitism. Since the incident, Attal has left France. After a short spell with the Turkish club Adana Demirspor, he has joined Qatari side Al Saad.
As David Beckham celebrates his 50th birthday on May 2nd, the former football icon has much to look back on, both on and off the pitch. Known for his legendary stints with Manchester United and Real Madrid, Beckham also earned over 100 caps for England before turning his attention to business and philanthropy. Earlier this month, he marked the milestone with a star-studded birthday celebration surrounded by close friends and family. Beyond football, Beckham continues to leave a mark through humanitarian work. As a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador since 2005, he launched the Seven Fund to support vulnerable children worldwide, with a strong focus on Africa.
Israeli warplanes have been bombing Gaza in the past few hours, killing at least 17 people, including children. They've targeted tents for displaced Palestinians that were home to several families. It's been nearly 6 weeks now since Israel broke the ceasefire. Since then, more than 2,300 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed. US media is reporting aid deliveries to the enclave may resume soon, but it would be under a very different system. The US has held talks with Israel and representatives of an unnamed foundation to ensure deliveries are made without the involvement of Hamas. The Red Cross is warning that the humanitarian response in Gaza is on the verge of total collapse. The International Court of Justice in the Netherlands has wrapped up a week of hearings on Israel's humanitarian responsibilities to Palestinians. Over the past 5 days, more than 40 countries and 4 international bodies have taken part. Almost all have called for urgent steps to lift the now more than 2-month blockade and get aid into Gaza.
If Palestine refugees are denied their right of return, and if they are further displaced, dispersed, and dispossessed, the ability of the Palestinian people to exercise self-determination would be forever lost. And that is why UNRWA is indispensable.
Israel has launched new airstrikes on Syria, this time targeting the city of Dara, south of Damascus. The attack has caused considerable damage, but we don't have any news of casualties so far. The Syrian President, Ahmed al-Shara, has condemned Israel for its attack, saying they mark a dangerous escalation. Washington says it's stepping back from mediating peace between Russia and Ukraine, now leaving it to the two sides to resolve the conflict. The move has come as the parliament in Kiev prepares to ratify a minerals deal recently agreed with Washington, which offers financial support to Kiev. Germany's main opposition party has been designated as an extremist threat to democracy by Germany's domestic intelligence agency. It's the Alternative for Germany party. The AfD came second in recent federal elections. Its leaders are calling the designation politically motivated ahead of a new government coalition taking charge next week.